Good afternoon and welcome to the second panel in the Project Race Prajnya series of webinars on transforming gender norms, how to work with men and boys. Uh, as you know, Project Race and ECF have been working with men and boys in the community for a very long time. But for Prajna, this has been an aspirational thing. We think in principle this is a really good idea, but we really can't get people to come to our programs. We can't figure out what kind of programs to do that will engage them. So when Christina approached us to work together on the series, we had a very vested interest in getting all of our questions, spoken and unspoken, answered by people who know better. And that's what we're doing today. Last week, we talked about all the reasons why people began working with men and boys, why it was important to include them in the work on gender equality. And this week's panel has people who have been working with men and boys for a long time, a lot of experience, a lot of learning. We hope a lot of stories and anecdotes, and a lot of good program ideas that we can poach shamelessly and experiment with at our end. And it's my great privilege to read out these extremely impressive bios and introduce our panelists to you. And I would start with today's facilitator, really actually needs no introduction to anyone in the women's movement in India. Her name is Nandita Shah. A feminist activist and researcher, Dr. Nandita Shah has over 30 years of experience strengthening the women's movements locally, nationally, and internationally, both through her activism and writing. She is co-founder of Akshara Center, a not-for-profit women's rights organization based in Bombay, which dreams of enabling and creating a gender-just society. Their work has had an indelible impact on the consciousness of many young boys and girls, and but also has led to several collaborative ventures to reform systemic gender violence through public and private institutions. Her expertise in building different public private partnerships has led to institutionalized initiatives with police, transport authorities, and local municipalities for creating safer cities for women. She is also on the Civil Society Advisory Group of UN Women and active in the World Social Forum. She has been on many expert committees, including the Planning Commission for Women's Rights, for drafting women's policy in Maharashtra. In addition, she has co-authored two books, Issues at Stake, Theories and Practice in the Contemporary Women's Movement in India, and Contingent Workers. Dr. Nandita Shah has completed her PhD from the University of Amsterdam in social science, and her postgraduate academic background is in women's studies and in social work. Our three panelists are also um, overachievers. Since a couple of them are my peers, I can say this without sounding patronizing, I think. And I'm going to start with uh, Manak Matiyani from the YP Foundation. Manak is a feminist queer activist and works with the YP Foundation, a youth development organization, as executive director. Manak has led campaigns, research, and programs that created a deeper engagement and reflection on masculinities and gender based violence among men and boys. He has specific experience of designing and facilitating training and media based engagements on these issues. He was the co director of the Men and Boys for Gender Justice Film Festival, which was organized by the International Association of Women in Radio and Television, or the Men Engage Global Symposium, in 2014. He led the Must Bowl campaign, facilitating university students to create and use short films for expanding dialogue and action for masculinities and gender on campus from 2011 to 13. He has also led the design and implementation of the Madovali Bath program of the YP Foundation, which has taken up research, training, media creation, and informed SRHR curricula at YP since 2016. Welcome, Manak. Second person I'd like to introduce is a dear friend, Anuradha Kapoor, who's the founder of Swayam, which is 25. And I'm extremely excited about Swayam's birthday. So I have to say this. Anuradha is the founder and director of Swayam, a feminist organization committed to advancing women's rights and ending gender inequality and violence against women, established in May 1995. Anuradha is both an Ashoka Fellow and an Eisenhower Fellow, and was member of the Civil Society Advisory Group for UN Women in India 2012 to 2014, and in their multi country office for India, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives 2015 to 17. She was invited to participate in Kaun Banega Crorepati and was felicitated as a Karmavir in November 2020. She has also been presented the Parivartan Inspire Award in 2019, the Business Today Impact Women Award in 2018, and the Gaurav Vocational Excellence Award from Rotary Club of Calcutta in 2014. Anuradha is an activist, trainer, and consultant for women and human rights organizations, academic institutions, and UN agencies, and has co authored articles, research, and manuals on the issue of violence against women. Swayam's holistic approach um, includes providing a comprehensive range of support services for women facing violence and numerous group activities to promote their creativity and positive mental health. Swayam's preventive program includes public education and awareness building, producing creative resources, disseminating information, and sharing expertise and networking with like minded organizations, institutions for systemic change. We work with women and girls as well. Swayam works with women and girls as well, and men, as well as men and boys in rural and urban communities to enable them to address and take action against discrimination and violence against women and build a violence free and gender just society. Our third panelist today is Sujata Khandekar, who is the founding director and secretary board of trustees of CORO India. Sujata is a grassroots feminist. She's a co founder of CORO India. She was formerly an assistant engineer in the Maharashtra State Electricity Board, Mumbai, when she was deputed for adult literacy related work initiated by the government of Maharashtra and CORO. She received an MA in Gender Education and International Development from the University of London and was a fellow in the Leadership Development Program of the MacArthur Foundation, India. Empowerment of grassroots women and gender equality has been Sujata's focus of personal and professional interventions over the last 28 years. She firmly believes that the leadership of social change has to emerge from within. CORO's grassroots leadership development program is being implemented in Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and Delhi, and it is Sujata's dream project. Sujata has authored a book in Marathi, Ashe Venasha, Hope Without Hope, based on her community related work. She has represented CORO in national and international fora and has contributed to many publications. Grassroots movements, grassroots mobilization, construction of masculinities and femininities have been the focus of Sujata's activism and writing. Sujata is currently pursuing her PhD on meanings of women empowerment with a focus on collective knowledge building from the grassroots. I welcome you with all my heart and with great gratitude that you've taken the time to be a part of this. And I hand this over to Nandita now. Nandita, thank you so much for making this happen.
You're mute. Nandita, you're on mute. Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel and being part of together with friends and thinking together is always exciting. And thank you, Prajnya and ECF, for organizing and taking the initiative of organizing the series. So I'm most excited to be part of this conversation. We just had conducted a study of young people across 8 cities, almost 6,000 people across 8 cities in the age group of 15 to 29. And what we found was quite surprising, that though there was huge number, almost 89% of them believe that men and women are equal and that they should have all the equal rights. You go one layer down below, and actually a lot of what they believe, not believe. Like 54% believe that it's women's clothes that lead to sexual harassment. Only 1.5% of men believe that um, doing housework is their work. So that is the range that we are talking about when we are talking about working with men. It's not just saying, don't raise hands on somebody, but what is the kind of man woman relationship we are looking at? What's the kind of society in which we see that that kind of equality exists, that's there in people's mind? And we believe today's young people are much more ready to have that conversation about equality, but it very soon gets into अच्छा ये तो बहुत फेमिनिज्म हो गया, ये तो बहुत ज्यादा हो गया, ये तो सब मिसयूज हो रहा है. So how do we go beyond that? And I think all the three people uh, have tried that way of working, and I think ECF and all of us are trying to find different ways for this communication and conversation to go ahead. And I'm actually going to begin with Sujata, because working with younger kids and doing the entire GEM study, so I thought it'll be interesting to try and have this as a conversation and not just as a presentation by one or the other. So we will talk to each other. We'll try and figure out uh, how do we take this understanding forward, and how do we learn from each other. We do it in many different ways. We are learning from each other, but how do we, in this conversation, provide a kind of comprehensive way in which audience and listeners can get an idea? So I just wanted to ask Sujata, if you could kind of begin by what made you get into GEMS? How did you start? What was your thinking at that time?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, good afternoon, everybody. And coming back to Nandita's question, the history of James actually runs into 2003 when we did a action research with Population Council. It was on construction of masculinities amongst young men in low-income communities of Mumbai. And CORO was extensively and intensively working on violence against women issues for almost like 16, 17 years. And the realization was it is not enough to work with women and just try to empower them to challenge, because most often we also saw that the backlash increases and then they need support. So actually that lot of thinking was going on, and here was the opportunity to understand what is psyche of the men, especially young men, how they perceive violence, how does it reflect in their behavior, what are the conversations that go around amongst young men, etc. So actually that really helped us to understand. I mean, we wanted to work with men to because we had realized that men, yes, men are problem. I mean, part of problem, but they can and they are also part of solution. So unless we bring them as on board as partners, this is not going to solve. So that's how it started. And here was the opportunity to work with Pop Council on that. So it gave us really insights on how men perceive of violence. We found that men don't think what they're doing is violence because they think it's a norm. They have been seeing it, they have been practicing it. Society endorses it, society appreciates it. So they never thought that it was violence. And there was no single construct of masculinity. It was a continuum of masculinities. On one side, it was macho man, and the other side, the feminine man, kind of, So that was the continuum. And actually, this study also motivated us to do similar study with young women, because it is young women, it is women who most often endorse some kind of masculinities and discourage some kind of masculinity. So there was a follow-up study done with women, but both research indicated to us that it is impossible to change the attitudes, mental shifts that are rigidly formed. And so the intervention has to be at the earlier age. That's where the GEMS program came in. And it was with the children of between age group of 12 to 50. And we found in GEMS that the attitudes of children in this age are almost identical to that of young men and young women in their age group, like 16 to 24 and above. So and so we tried to work on concepts, understanding of these concepts, how to actualize these concepts in practice, what are the challenges, and how one should be assertive in relationships, saying no to that. And this we did in Mumbai municipal schools, 250 municipal schools, with ICRW, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and CORO were the partners. And when we disseminated the findings of this, actually Maharashtra government and UNICEF, they came up with an idea of taking it to the scale of the state. And that's how we worked in almost 24,000 schools in Maharashtra, the primary and upper primary schools.
Yeah, I'm aware because we were at the same time doing
Absolutely.
another project together on setting up
Absolutely. Yeah.
gender resource center in most of these places where women's education rate, participation rate was very low. So we worked very closely in it. I'm going to come
Right.
back to you, Sujata,
Yeah.
after we have some
Sure.
more conversation because there are many questions that we can take on. So I'm
Sure.
going to come to Anu. Anu, what made you, because you were clearly working on violence against women and looking at, services, and then you moved to working with communities. So what led you to working with men?
No, Nandita, it's interesting. First of all, thanks a lot for having me here, Prajnya, as well as ECF. Yeah, I think it's very interesting when we say that what made us work with men. I think that as a women's organization, we've been working with men since the time we started. If we look at it, we've been working with students, with boys when we were doing our awareness programs. We were working with stakeholders like, the police, like with lawyers, judges. So we were working with men right from the very beginning. But the difference was we were not looking at men as the direct primary stakeholders with whom we will do a program. They were there because we were working with women. We were also working with them because we wanted to change attitudes. When women went to a say police station, we were doing training with the police. Mostly they were men, to change their attitudes. So we were working with men throughout our history, in a sense, but never as the main focus of a separate program. They were all part and parcel. And we were very clear about one thing. I always refer to this example when I started doing trainings in schools with young school children, boys and girls together. We would always get, a kind of feedback from the boys saying exactly what Sujata said, that they didn't realize that what they were doing was violence, or they didn't understand that what was happening in society was discrimination. And very early on, you might remember, we did a study where we looked at, how boys and girls who were in schools were looking at gender inequality and violence. And we found that, the boys were very, um, the girls had kind of been empowered because women's groups have been working with women for such a long time, but the boys were still in the patriarchal mold. And we could see that if this continues, there is going to definitely be a huge increase in the conflict between the two. So
True.
organizationally, we had been, thinking about this for a long time. But in the early days of the organization, I think we were very busy kind of trying to work with the women because, women were really lagging behind. But then two things are there. One is that most of the abusers are men, and men are also impacted when there is violence against women, and men are impacted by uh, patriarchy. So, in the communities where we were working with the women, but then when women get empowered, as Sujata also pointed out, there was a backlash because men were not ready to accept empowered women. So ultimately, if we had to stop violence and we had to, enable women's environment, we had to work with men and boys. So when we, around 6 years ago, we started, but we were very clear that we were working with men and boys only in the communities where we were already working with women. So what we wanted to do was to really build a community where we would be able to impact not only the women but also men and boys and other stakeholders who were there, so that we could try and see whether the community itself changes its perceptions. So that's actually how we got into it. It wasn't something that came just like that. It's been there, but I think we decided that it was about time that we focused intervention on men and boys. And we had two main kind of objectives. One was to stop violence against women in those communities, and that you needed to work with an abuser to be able to stop that. And the second thing was also to get them to understand what's in it for them. I mean, if violence stops, how are they going to benefit from it? So it would be both, looking at both angles, so that we were not working with them just for our gain, but also to show them how they would benefit from it. So basically, that's how we began.
Yeah, I think a lot of us who began work from the feminist work and moved to working with men see this as not just an addition to how it's going to benefit women, but also how is patriarchy affecting men, and how can men also understand their privilege, and from that angle join in. And I think I would like to invite Manak on this note to say, how do you see your role or role of YP in process of building this narrative?
Thank you so much, Nandita, and thank you very much for having me in this discussion. So I work with a youth organization, and while the YP Foundation has focused its programming on men and boys, as well as the other groups of young people that we work with. Since about 2006, I've also had work with men and boys, which is older than my work here at YP. And it was kind of coming together of what we were interested in as an organization and my own interest that sort of led to the current program that we have right now. There are a couple of reasons why we really wanted to focus and look at how to do this work with men. One, of course, like many people said, that many of us organizations working on gender, sexuality, and I've learned this from many of your organizations that have done this work before I started, I think, and YP as a youth organization started, was that we saw men always standing at the door, at the windows when programs are going on with girls. And the boys are standing outside and they were being a nuisance. So one started because one had to do something with those boys, one had to tackle them, as a problem. And so therefore started some work with men to engage them on the side, and slowly realized that a lot of our work, exactly like you were saying, Anupama, while our work was very geared towards working with women, and that was the need of the hour. While we slowly incorporated working with men into our approaches, many times, even though the men came inside the room and became participants, they got bored because they did not find that curricula, that approach really addressing their life situations. So it was, we sort of at YP did a program for 2 years and then set out to find out how can we do this better across programs, how do we work with men in a bigger consciousness of their needs, their realities, and the kinds of questions that they are asking. Because what we were really seeing as an organization working on sexual and reproductive health and rights is that continuously men and boys are asking this great question of how do I know in a sexual relationship that my partner is enjoying themselves and having fun, and the only thing that we had to tell them in a curriculum was no means no. And it was that disjunct between what we were able to tell the men in an organized approach and what they were asking that really got us interested in doing this research and finding out further about how to work better with men. What I also feel in the course of doing that finding out is that many times we also approach this, the whole sexuality, gender work is in its own binary sometimes of saying, we need to celebrate and acknowledge and bring out women's acceptance of their own sexuality and the social acceptance of women's sexuality. And we need to control men's sexuality. And so it's interesting that the biggest set of men that programs like sexuality education programs or awareness programs end up reaching to are straight cisgender men, but that is the segment within sexuality work that is considered most boring. When we do work on sexuality issues, we want to take up work on queer issues, we want to take up, and all of that is important. But the other thing that we wanted to definitely address is what is it that we want to really influence and change about how young men are taught sexual behavior and to be sexual beings. Does that incorporate only like a physical act? Does it incorporate some kind of emotional understanding of what this act will do to them and their partner? So that was the other thing that we really wanted to influence and get into. And our guiding framework in doing that then has been, again, a question of what does young men's feminist leadership look like in a context where feminism for men should really be about shutting up and listening to the leadership of other genders. Uh, Many times programmatically we end up just creating groups of men who will then go and take the mantle of solving violence against women as a problem. And so how not to do that, how to really sort of, what you were saying, and what you started with, that oppression will get quickly noticed and boys will start, thinking, "Ki, how can I relieve somebody else's problem or, improve the situation for women?" But privilege escapes notice very easily. So this kind of cognition of their own privilege is something that we are continuously trying to do in the programs and the work that we do with young men and boys. And those are the really the questions and then the endeavors that have led us to expanding our work on masculinities and with men and boys.
Yeah, and I see this as a quite a challenge because it's so easy for all of us to get into either a protectionist mode as a man, you do it, or you a lot of times men become woke and then they will tell their wives what to do, or I gave permission for you to become a sarpanch. So this kind of protectionist, a new way of thinking, can be also another form of you know oppression, and that is what also we are challenging. But it's a continuum of change, and I think that's what also we have to recognize, that everything is not going to change at one go, and how do we allow for that continuum to also exist simultaneously, so and I think we'll come back to the discussion a little bit on issues of challenges of issues of sexuality. But I just want to come back to, because Sujata's work also is working with children, and how does one communicate very simple notions of gender equality at that level? And when you do this kind of mass program, what are the challenges that you see, and how do we then bring in this aspect of it shouldn't be protection? How does one bring some of those conversations?
Yeah, actually, when we did GEMS, I mean, this was with both young boys and girls together in a classroom setting. And one of the greatest challenges were the gatekeepers in the school itself. We all have gatekeepers all over, like within family, you have them,
Yeah.
in school, you have them, in community, you have them. So dealing with these gatekeepers is one challenge, kind of. And what we did was actually we do everything from children's day-to-day experiences, made them reflect on those experiences individually and collectively, got some activities for them to do together collectively in classrooms, at the school level, also at the village level, where children took up some camping. So actually, it was at different levels, their introduction to their own perceptions about violence, about relationship, about assertion in the relationship, because most often girls were so shy and they didn't want to say anything, they were scared. So actually telling them that please speak up, and it's not a crime to speak up, kind of, you have that right. So I think that becomes kind of challenge, and to speak to them in their own language with their own experiences, gathering from all what they are experiencing was this. But actually, the results were really good in that sense. They started reflecting. People came back. I mean, children came back saying how they have started helping their family members, how they have started giving importance to their sister studies, etc. But more importantly, teachers came back to us saying, we want to know what you are doing with children, because the attendance in the school had increased on those days when the James activity used to happen, so they wanted to know what you are doing. And children, of course, did not speak in front of they did not communicate with teachers because that scare was there, but the James facilitator went as their friends. So, and they were not so elderly. I mean, there was some age difference of like say 8 to 10 years kind of thing. So that helped, and also parents came back saying my child was introvert. Now he has started speaking, etc., etc. So in that sense, the response was good. But the main challenge, actually, we also did a longitudinal study after we did GEMS. After 5 years. So we did intervention for 3 years in the school with children, with teachers, and then after 5 years, we did longitudinal study. And what came out of longitudinal study is really important for all of us as interventionists. Like children remembered everything that they did. They, I mean, they recognized facilitators because the same facilitators went for this survey. They recognized them. They narrated what they did in the classroom, but actually, very few of them were able to do their behavior based on what they had learned and they had agreed to in the classroom. So what came up as very important thing is you need conducive environment. You need really supportive environment for children to execute on what they think is right. I mean, girls though who were really very bright participants of GEMS as we knew them had to get married early because their parents forced them and they said you are liability, we can't look at you, we are going for out for work, etc. The boys who had tried to resist sexual harassment on roads, etc., were badly beaten black and blue, and they were hospitalized, so their confidence had come down. So these such things, and we realized that the biggest challenge is we can't do this work in isolation. We have to bring everybody on board, like family members, community members, the larger ecosystem that would help the children to thrive with their newly acquired concepts of equality. So that was a great challenge.
No, I totally agree because this whole thing of the ecosystem of change has to be built around. And I think that for us, like our recognition is also that media plays a very important
Oh
role
yeah.
in reinforcing some of these things. And some of our big campaigns have been around how do we challenge the sexism of media? How do we challenge the way in which so many things are reinforced by the media? So we had run a big campaign called Ghana Rewrite, where we had invited people to change the sexist lyrics, bringing the awareness around how sexism affects. And people were saying, like young people were saying, "Hamara 31st kharab ho gaya," because all those songs is what you are dancing on without even realizing what it's doing in your mind, and subliminal message that comes. So I think it's a very important area on how do we look at the ecosystem. So Anu, if you can elaborate a little bit around the whole idea of, because your notion that you are entering a community and you're trying to build somewhat of that ecosystem. So how does that work and what are the challenges that you are facing?
So I think the way we are entering also is through the boys who come into our program. The men and boys are connected to the women's groups that we work with. So we start out by kind of getting say the sons or husbands or family members of the women who are already we are working with, right? So in a way, there is, in the home, you're also trying to make it much more easy for the woman when she asks for change, or she wants an understanding or recognition of her rights, that you will also be able to create that environment within her home. So we try to get source men and boys from their families, and then they bring in their friends and their peers and stuff, so you get an ecosystem of people who you're working with. And what we find in terms of in the last 6 years, what we've been doing is, initially we were working separately with the women and separately with the men, but now what we've started doing is working with men and boys, and defining, there are change makers who are now sort of able to take action within the communities, talk, support, all of those things, and have shown change in their personal lives and their personal behavior, along with women who are also leaders in their groups. So they come together and they do things together. So it's no longer just looked upon as men doing this, it's a collective of people doing it. So if there is, say for example, a case of violence in the community, then both the men and the women's groups work together to address that. So that way what happens is, I think that, you know, it becomes more like a holistic way of looking at it, and the challenges are fewer if the community comes together. And now what we're trying to do is also bring in adolescents and bring in, like, you know, working in a particular community where we work across the age groups, because the men and boys group work we were doing was mainly with, say, 16 to 24 odd years, but now we're going above and below that and also doing the same with women. So not just the women's groups, that the SHG groups, but also working with adolescent girls. And so that we create an environment, because otherwise the challenges are huge. And you know, as Sujata was saying, when we uh, in men and boys, the I think that the problem which all of us actually have articulated, it's very easy for men to become the saviors, to become the protectors, to become those who are going out to save the world. And how do we prevent that from happening? So which is why I think that challenge has to be met with working in tandem with women's groups and not, you know, on their own. So that is one thing that we find. And secondly, like, the challenge that we have is that there's a huge dropout rate with men, which we don't have with women. And I think that's also because we're challenging core beliefs. When we are doing this work with men and boys, we're challenging their core beliefs, and it becomes very difficult for a lot of them to actually agree to change, because that really means you have to change your life. And how a lot of men drop out because of that. And then there's also another challenge of, because they are bread earners, so they might be migrating, they might have, you know, issues about giving time and stuff. So that's the other thing. But mainly I think that this business of, when you are challenging their core beliefs, they're scared, and they fall out. So that's another big, you know, sort of problem. And I think another challenge, I don't know if you all have faced this, is that the people who are running the program, the men who are running the program, also have to have the same thinking, right? So even to get the right resource to be able to go out and expand the work in the community, you need to have enough pool of men who have that kind of thing. And what Nandita was saying, I think, is important, that, you know, change will not happen perfectly. When we are working with men and boys, it's not going to be a perfect response. There have been cases where men have done, like, you know, said they've changed. When we've talked to the family members, we're finding out that there's been a huge change, and then suddenly something will happen and things will go backwards. So it's not like a constant moving forward. There's a back and forward, even with men and boys that you're working with over a period of time. And this protectionist attitude, or allowing my sister to do this, that narrative will come in the beginning, but then slowly that narrative will change. So we also have to be prepared. I think sometimes we become very kind of black or white, but I think there's a lot of gray in between, and we need to negotiate that space very carefully, so that it doesn't end up being what, you know, that men are taking over. But at the same time, it also gives men, I mean, one of the things that we've seen, that it gives men that understanding of how it's making a change for the positive in their own lives. And that is a positive way of moving. Just share an example with you, is one of our my colleagues who joined at that point. You know, we did a whole year of training with them to get them to start the work. And you know, initially he was like every other man who's been brought up in a particular way. His thinking was like that, and he is married and has a little son. And one day he came to us about 4 years after he had started working with us, and he was looking very sad. I asked him, "Why are you looking like this?" So he says, "Actually, I was leaving the house and my son wanted me to feed him, give him breakfast, but I couldn't stay because I had to come for work. So I'm feeling bad about it." Now, the same boy, when he had come, would never look into anything that his child did, right? He said that that's not my job. But today there is a changed person. So I think it takes time, and we have to be prepared for all the back and forths and the challenges that will come, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, like sometimes, as what we were saying earlier, that you're not even aware of where are you taking the space. Like, you know, one of the analysis we had done, because we do a lot of young people, so we were all together doing garba dance, and it's a very common thing. And suddenly, after like half an hour of the music, you could see that all the men had taken over the center space for dancing, and all the women were on the periphery trying to just be outside. And we just stopped and having that community, because everybody was enjoying, it was a joint thing, it was together, but how easy it is to claim the space and take over. And when you start making them realize some of these things, there's also a certain level of defensiveness that comes up, as to, we are taking everything too seriously. We are not allowing, like, kuch bhi cheez chut nahi rahi hai, we are not able. And, like the example that we see is privilege challenge to certain extent is fine. Beyond that, then there is, so even the how much we are pushing the boundary also is a process that we have to allow and
Yeah.
take on. So I think that's the thing. But I wanted to come back to you, Manak, on this whole thing around gatekeepers, because when you are taking up issues of sexuality, when you are taking up even multiple genders, there are just so many gatekeepers who are not interested in that dialogue to happen amongst the young people. So how do you break that, and what are the methods you use to continue that conversation?
I think like most organizations that take up these issues, one of the two lenses, of course, have become saying that it is also going to be helpful in preventing gender-based violence, this recognition of what might be violence, and therefore one needs to talk about sex and sexuality. But I think we have also at YP taken a very conscious kind of sexual rights approach. So we've had difficulties, of course, where curriculum are stopped midway by school principals or in communities there are issues raised. But we do have an approach where we try and inform people about, and it's been interesting, right? Like these communities, some gatekeeper or the other would be interested in sort of stopping it. But when we've had conversation with parents saying, "Ki, do you think young people should have this information? Do you think your children should have this information and have an organized conversation about themselves, their bodies and sexuality?" Parents say yes. They typically don't know who should be doing this conversation. And a lot of parents have actually told us that we also don't know how, because we never had this conversation. And so it has been interesting for us, where even in places like, say, rural Rajasthan, parents have been quite okay with the fact that, yes, do it in school, somebody should have this conversation, and it's good that somebody is doing this in an organized way. What has been also interesting is that apart from gatekeepers, there is so much of stigma around sexuality that the first kind of barrier you have to break of stigma is amongst those young people themselves. So we've had so many instances where in a classroom, some young people themselves will be like, ye sab gandi baatein hain, this is all bad and we should not be talking about this. And that becomes and those conversations about why is it such a bad thing, why do we need to have this conversation, and to keep it focused on having awareness, information, and from a positive point of view, even that for a lot of girls, because of that kind of stigma, to start having this conversation, for a lot of boys to get out of jokes about this conversation is the bigger challenge sometimes, to say, it's not always a joke. What does joking about this really lead to? What are the kinds of jokes, exactly like you did with the lyrics, right? What are the kinds of jokes? Where do they come from? What is that perspective? That is a big chunk of the conversation as well, with gatekeepers around this. And we've been on not on the fence, but we try and take both those approaches, saying that, of course, if you want to call it somebody else, but stick to the principle of what and the guidelines of what should be said in the classroom and what kind of approach we take when we talk to the participants and the young people directly. You keep that intact, that's also fine. We can go with another inroad that we get. But we've also taken the approach of saying, along with the sessions, which we want to make it easy for people to attend safely. So we might not, scream from the rooftop saying this is what we are discussing. We will then, at the end of the session, together with those young people in the sessions, do a campaign in the community to normalize talking about those kinds of issues. And that has been our inroad into actually having conversation with parents, with other gatekeepers, with the young people themselves, so that eventually we leave those young people also a little more confident, saying we can also negotiate this in our families or in our communities. And that's been usually our attempt when we tackle gatekeeping.
That's interesting. For us, the gatekeepers have also, yeah, I'll just give you, gatekeepers have also been like teachers and college lecturers and principals who would allow, not allow certain kind of conversation to happen. And then that becomes a challenge. Sujata, you wanted to add
Yeah,
something?
just regarding the challenges, Nandita, I wanted to come in and saying, I mean, just underline, which I mean, I know everybody knows about it, but just I wanted to underline that as we had spoken in earlier also, like bringing men together is challenging, and to keep them together for a longer time is always a challenge, because actually they just don't, it is very difficult for them to understand what would they gain if there is behavioral change and there is mental shift in their attitude. So that clarity actually always is not there, you know. I mean, so for example, in women's movement, if we tell women to speak up, to uh,
Hmm.
express and
Yeah.
talk about their oppression, etc., and women know that if they do that, they are going to get rid of violence that they are suffering from. But for men, it's so difficult. Like, what is their gain? What is for
Hmm.
them? Because for them, if we see in a very generalized way, it is loss of their power.
Hmm.
So very difficult to negotiate with them and bring them together, and also motivate them to stay together. That I wanted to underline. And so I just wanted to give an example, like one of my colleagues who was part of this Yari Dosti, when he was asked in in one of the meetings, like, why does what is the benefit of shifting your gender sensitivities, etc. And he said, actually, what he said was interesting. He said, I have always seen scare in my mother's eyes for my father, always. And actually, that has impacted so much on all of us. But when I see respect and connectedness in my wife's eyes, I feel better. That makes me feel better. But actually, I'm also thinking that to come to this kind of understanding, it needs really a lot of work. I mean, how you do away with your deep rooted sensibilities that have also given you privileges, you know, to do away with that. So that becomes the challenge while working with men. I just wanted to point
Yeah, and
Yeah.
quite a lot of examples have also come in by, uh, the care when you see it in your eyes, when
out.
you are able to bring that care for the other, and how that relationship changes. And
Yeah,
that has also
right.
been an area that a lot of men have felt has benefited. Anu, you wanted to add?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is that I think that benefit of how, um, the relationship that they have, whether it is with their mother, their sister, their partner,
Right.
that is a very big motivator for them. And I think that they've never really thought about it. I mean, there's countless instances of men sharing that, we never used to eat together as a family. The
Right.
women would serve us, and then we would eat, and then they would eat. But now we sit together as a family and we eat. But when we are doing that, there is a connectivity, we're talking to each other, so there is a give and take which we have never felt before. So this business of emotion, I'm able to feel an emotion of connectedness, and I'm able to share with people who I love, but I've been taught how to love them in a different way or show my affection in a different way. But I'm actually now receiving something different, which makes me feel much better. So I think that is one big area, but it takes time to get there. That is true.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
at the same time, like, so to sort of get there, we also have this thing of building, at least say when we're working in the villages, it's not like every boy and or man that we work with has the ability to speak up or to talk or to express themselves. So we also have within the program ways in which they can take leadership and they can start speaking. So some of these boys who've never actually spoken publicly in their lives today are taking a mic and speaking in front of a whole bunch of people. So that leadership that is being developed within them also is a great motivator, because then it's like, my identity is no longer just another boy in the village. My identity is now becoming somebody who is respected, who is a go-to person in the village. If there is a problem, then they will come to me. So those are also some of the other areas that we need to work with men and boys, because that really helps. That's a great motivator, being identified as somebody who is beyond just nobody in the, you know what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say? That is
Yeah,
building that leadership really helps.
true. Manak, you want to come in here?
Sure. So,
Yeah.
sorry, you wanted to add something, Nandita?
No. I just want to invite you.
Sure. So I think it's been really, I think one of the reasons we ran a program for 2 years and then went back into doing research was also because it just became really hard, even in a very small focus program. And I do want to talk about this because it's always good to learn from others. We had a very small focus program that worked in one iteration with, say, about 15, 16 boys, an intensive kind of program with 15, 16 boys for a year through residential workshops and a lot of sort of sharing. But even in that small group, it was just so hard always to tackle the masculinity in the room that, it was continuously boys in competition with each other. If you have a story, I have a better story. If, you had this kind of experience, I have a better experience to share. And at one level, they would just, the moment somebody is letting go and trying to become more vulnerable, in front of that group, somebody would pass a joke and it would all go out of the window. And at the other level, there would be this competition about who has the better information, the better insight, and the better story to share. And that was a very interesting experience for us, a really sort of hard learning experience to say, how do we really, in this, even this small group, facilitate a group of boys to become supportive to each other. And that's where we also realize that a lot of the work of masculinity and a lot of the expression of masculinity is not between men and women. It is between men and men. And at the same time, we were doing this conclave with a bunch of organizations, who came in and talked about how do we do programming with young men and boys. And a lot of the colleagues from different organizations in the sector did share about, we are looking at violence against women because that is what we are funded to run as programs. And, we have a GBV kind of approach to working with men, but we also want to tackle many other forms of violence that get addressed when you start talking about masculinity in itself. And while we really want to do that, we have those, GBV related program commitments. So how do we balance these two? Our approach of tackling GBV, but our interest in just talking about violence and masculinities in and of themselves. And I think one of the things that we have been saying is, this kind of tying yourself down to gender indicators or showing that, men led a campaign is fine to show some programmatic outputs, but maybe actually, if you have more open masculinities programming, it'll have a significant impact on caste, on nationalism and ideas around nationalism, ideas around just violence and how men are supposed to do that. And that's not be capturing while we are running behind the gender indicators. So those have been the other interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I
And
agree
this,
that this kind of broadening of framework is what we need to also engage with. Yeah, somebody wanted to add? Was it Anu or Sujata?
yeah, I mean, when we are talking about violence, it's not just, and we're talking about patriarchy and how it impacts men, then this discussion does come up that, it's not just violence that men are doing on women, but it's also the violence that is being played out with men. And that conversation actually is a very important one, because any man who doesn't conform to the patriarchal norms is also facing violence. So so that also becomes it's a point which I think men kind of are able to relate to. And I think that this idea of broadening the violence spectrum is a very important one. However, I mean, I have to say that we don't get limited by just because we have the gender indicators does not mean that we do not talk about these issues. We talk about them, and maybe they're not put out as an indicator, but you have to address that, because if violence is happening within a group of men, it is bound to spill over. I mean, that is a minimum space. So I think that it's really important for us to address it. And in this context, I also want to say that the larger, I mean, I'm sure all of us have faced it in the last 2 years, the kind of political impact of what is happening in our country is also impacting men a lot. And I think that violence that we are seeing is also something that we've had to tackle in our programs. It's been a big challenge because now the boys are saying that what's happening here, what are we going to do about it? You're working with us for this, but what are you going to do about what is happening to us, and because we are working in the minority communities. So for them, it's a huge pressure, what's happening all around. So we have to deal with those issues. You cannot run a program and not deal with that issue. And then when COVID comes along, you can't say, I'm doing GBV, I'm not going to address this issue. You have to address the issue. So I think the program has to be responsive to what is happening on the ground. Just because we have a GBV focus does not mean that we cannot integrate it. Integrate what is happening on the ground and affecting men's lives. Otherwise, we lose them all. So you can't run the program without addressing these issues, I think.
Yeah, Sujata.
Yeah, actually, just continuing from what Anu just said, actually, we are also working in communities that are predominantly minority populated. And what we also saw in last a year and a half, more generally, is Muslim young people are taking lot of initiative in our work with men. And Anu, you just talked about the alternate, I mean, the leadership, the leadership aspect, the leadership domain. So what we also observe that these young men are trying to claim those spaces. And there is need for establishing their alternate identity, because always actually they are looked at with suspicion. Anything happens in the community, they are targeted, etc. So they are also motivated to establish their alternate identity, and that's why their participation is phenomenal. I mean, they have started small groups amongst young men. They are working on their own also. Now they have their own stimulus, I mean, of working, coming up with different ideas. But I thought this was really a kind of welcome development happening. Though unfortunately the political environment was the trigger for
Exactly.
this.
It's
Yeah.
going to make
Yeah.
it difficult. I have a last question, but I'm just going to encourage everybody to put their question on the chat, and then we are going to open up for discussion and invite people. But I also feel that as soon as men do some small things, there's
Yeah.
so much of appreciation. Kitna acha husband hai, kitna usne, they almost become godlike, and that also gives a certain sense of power in the family context. And a lot of times in our work, I feel that the real challenge to the family as an institution becomes difficult. What we are able to do is have good husbands or good men in the family. So how do we take this forward? What do we do with this?
Like I said before, it's a process, right? We can't achieve everything all at the same time. But it was interesting. I think in the last panel, somebody said that my wife is feminist, and every time I start doing this, she pulls me back. So what we need to do is also to empower women in the family to say, hey, you may be doing this, but it's that whole business of, oh, I'm babysitting my child, to say that you're not babysitting your child, it's your child, you're doing what you have to for your child, right? So the constant consciousness of making them aware that even whilst they're doing these things, they are being patriarchal, that is a continuous cycle. And to be honest, Nandita, if we think about it, patriarchy is something that we've all grown up with. And at
Yeah.
times, I find myself thinking things and I say, Anu, you're thinking this? How could you do it? I've been working 25 years in this field. My basic
Yeah.
instinct is to think in a particular way. Then my reason comes in and says, you shouldn't be thinking this, right? So it's a long process. And we just have to, that's why I said at the beginning that we also have to give ourselves some leeway to say that, yes, everything will not happen perfectly, but at least it will be better than what it was before. And over time, when children are brought up with equality, as the norm, that's when all of this will not happen. Till then, we'll have to be contented with what we can get for the moment. And I have this story about my son all the time, which I like to share, is that he grew up in a household where equality and feminism were being discussed at the dining table, right? So he has imbibed those principles. And once I came home and I saw a little poster in our lobby which said that tomorrow there's going to be a football match for boys. Girls can come and cheer. Right? I've shared this with you before. And I went up, I saw it, I went up, and my son came back. He was about 13 years old at the time, very angry. So I said, "What happened?" He said, "Didn't you see the poster downstairs?" I said, "Yes." So he said, "Well," I said, "Well, what? Why are you so angry?" He says, "Didn't you see they've written that girls can cheer? What do they think? Girls can't play football?" So he was really angry. And I thought that it didn't strike me. I just read it and I went up. But for him, it became so. That's what I'm saying, that maybe it needs you to be brought up in that way from the very beginning for you to be able to catch it. So we will never get the perfect solution right now, but over time, someday it'll happen.
Yeah. Manak, you want to come in
Yeah, and
for
Sujata is
this?
also raising her hand. So Sujata, do you want to go first?
No,
Sujata, sorry.
yeah, no, just one line. I thought the being non-judgmental and honest communication would be the process in this whole thing. Whether you are working with whether you are doing that with your family members or you are doing that with the community. I mean, I think these two are non-negotiable things in the whole process of working with men.
Hmm.
I think no. I was just actually a couple of these things came to mind. There's a great stand-up comic called Gia Sethi, I think, and it's her joke that I will repeat. She said, my brother comes in and says, "Ki I'm a feminist." So everybody's like, kitna real, kitna caring. Dekho pasta bhi banata hai, and and she comes in and says, "I'm a feminist," and people say, "Ki ye fir shuru ho gaya iska." So I think what you're saying about this, double standard around. So when this whole men's month, whatever that November men's focus month happens, at YP we ran a whole campaign called "Raise the Bar" because of that, age-old joke saying a feminist man walks into a bar, it's set very low. And so just to say that we need to raise the expectations from men. We can't, and I think that's the danger that we also try and tackle internally in, say, the development sector and in funding and in art. So we mandate ourselves as an organization to say at least 65 to 70% of outreach and participant across participants, young leaders that we work with should be young women and girls. That the bulk of our resources should not be focused on working with men. And same in the development sector, where and this is the great thing that I have learned from feminist organizations and activists that I got the chance to work with, to say that uh, the focus suddenly should not become on men saying the same thing that we have ignored women saying for many many years. So just because a man is saying it, we should not suddenly start listening up. And so in the development sector, the bulk of resources should not now get shifted towards working with men and boys, while that is important. So I think those have been the multiple things that we have also sort of been conscious of and thought about as we go into our work. And this exactly this kind of thinking boils down to the individual work, where take care of your children, make your own food, become these great things that we are hailing men for. And I think definitely programmatically or in personal interactions, that's the bar we need to raise. I feel that this work needs to start happening on the family WhatsApp group. I say this everywhere, that's the new site for change.
Yes.
And that's where I think we need to start calling out or directing men to behave better, to become better men.
Great. On this note, I'm going to open the dialogue for anybody else in the audience to ask questions, to have interaction, and maybe panelists can ask questions to each other. So let's open up and see who would like to come in. I can't see anybody. If you can just open your, just unmute yourself on your video and just ask the question, that would be great.
Can I go?
Yes.
Hi, this is Punika from Chip, Mumbai. So I want to ask, one of the panelists was speaking about how when you're telling these boys, that about how about patriarchy and about their mindsets, and how you're trying to slowly mold them to thinking differently. Do you feel that there's a dichotomy, that they feel like misfits in the society around them, or in their home, and their father's behaving in a certain way, and they have been taught, or they're being told to behave because of the training in a certain way? And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that dichotomy, and how, because that that could be challenging for a boy, of a young boy, to, he doesn't know what to imbibe and what to let go of it. So how do you challenge? I mean, how do you work on that?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, so anyone wants to take that
Yeah,
question?
yeah, I think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
definitely a challenge. No, go ahead, Sujata.
No,
Go.
go ahead, go ahead, go. So,
Okay, go.
go ahead. Acha. No, I'm saying yes, definitely that is a challenge, and most often we have seen that young men lose their peer groups also. I mean, which is so disastrous for them mentally. They get shaken up because even their friend starts ridiculing them, saying, "Oh, he has changed. Now he has become a very sophisticated person. He's not part of our group, etc." So actually, one thing we realize in while doing intervention is that we need to set up a support system for all the participants to ventilate, to come up with their own issues, to address them, and just give them a uh, kind of support of collective, being in collective. So that becomes very important because people really, one is in at the family level. Initially they get ridiculed, but later actually family people appreciate the change,
Yeah.
but their peers always ridicule them. And so you are one person in the classroom or wherever the training is happening. The moment you step out of that room or that space, you are thrown up with different challenges and people ridicule you. So the things that you are appreciated for in the space of training or capacity building, once you step out for the same reasons, you get ridiculed. So that dichotomy, and that does create a lot of stress. So we have to have a strong support system as integral part of the intervention where
So,
people can come and speak.
okay, so
Yeah.
Sujata ma'am, I want to ask you that when you're doing a program like this, then would it help if you have intermittent or regular, meetings with the community, like the parents, or like for somebody from the family, get them also involved, let them also feel a buy-in into the whole program. Will that help when you're doing a community program like this?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That is non-negotiable in that sense and very crucial. Actually, as CORO, we are working with family as a unit. So we
Oh,
work with men, we work with young men, young women, old women, all of them, and also children. So that becomes family as a unit, which actually takes care of lot of issues that could crop up within family system.
right, right, yes, and also helps the dialogue, so the
Yeah,
child
yeah,
can even ventilate with his family when he
yeah,
has some kind of, yes. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
And I just want to add that also a dialogue with teachers is critical because they have to also not continuously give, so that, like what we were saying about ecosystem, it's like, you tell a child gender equality and then your textbook is talking about only examples of men. So we have to look at even the curriculum. So it's a whole thing that around gender equality that we need to really bring in when we are doing interventions. And a lot of us are trying to do different changes at different levels. And it's a continuous process again.
yeah.
Anu,
Thank you.
you
Thank
want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's like this. Sujata said, yes, they are ridiculed, and that it's very important for us to create that peer support for them so that they are not the only ones, there are others. And over time what they see is that there is a shift, and when they start seeing one or two or three people, boys getting to a situation where they are now being respected in the community, then the peer group attitude also changes towards them.
Changes, yeah.
So it takes time, but it happens. And so when this ridiculing is happening, that's the time where we need to make sure that they have that peer support so that they can go through that process without falling by the wayside. And I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, we don't really work consistently in schools. So I can't say, but because we work in a community and we're drawing the men from that particular community, so you do have a group already. Within that group, you have that peer support system built in. So I think that's a non-negotiable. You have to have that support.
So I
Thank
just
you.
want to add, like we do work with colleges, and we create like what are called gender equality clubs in colleges, and it's more than one person there. So about 15, 20 people who are interested in that, both men and women. So then they become support system for each other
Each other.
and are able to help each other if these kinds of issues. And when the club is seen by the college, other people, there is a much better recognition.
Thank you, Natasha and Nandita. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anyone else for question?
Yeah, I have a question. My name is Yasmin. I'm from Magic Bus. Um, there are two questions. So in fact, the first is that for a facilitator, who's interacting with boys and men. So does gender play any role? So being a man speaking to boys or men in the community, does that work well, or it's basically about skills, and if you're able to uh, create that kind of experience for uh, boys and men to reflect. So does gender play any role in the context of facilitator? The second is that my personal challenge has been that it's very difficult to to talk about gender equality to men, because giving away privileges is not that easy. They may agree with you on the grounds that it is unfair, but bringing about that behavior change is very difficult, because uh, understanding something and but finally giving away privileges is something which doesn't come easy. So I may think that, okay, I mean, my wife doing all the work is not fair, but on a daily basis actually contributing to household chores is something which doesn't come easy. So f- the conversation is very different for with men. And what is the benefit? If I was a man, what is the benefit for me to uh, have equality? I have a lot to give up. So for me, having that conversation is how do we talk to what is the kind of how do I make it attractive to men and boys, that it is something that you also need to be part of.
Who
Uh,
wants to, Mana?
I thought Manak.
Sure, I can. That actually, thank you for that question. That brings a very interesting thought that we've had often to mind. One is that, yeah, we've always wondered whether we should automatically think of men doing work with men. So, would it only be possible for a group of young men and boys in the field to listen to other men? And very consciously taken the decision to have, even if the program anchor just out of a logistical comfort and being able to talk to them on their own terms is a male person, have very consciously decided to have facilitators who are other genders in the room often. So that the idea of actually listening to other genders and learning from other genders and building your opinion through that, through understanding that leadership on perspective, also really gets normalized and built for that group of men and boys that we work with. So we've taken that kind of decision in our programs, definitely. And I think it's very interesting a lot of times that, and that's what prompted us to go back and really reflect on the curricula, because of what we realize is, and it's strange to say we realize this, it's the obvious stupid thing to be doing, but what we were doing is basically in sexual health and safe sex kind of programming, telling men that you give up uh, this idea of pressuring your girlfriends to have sex with you so that you don't get what you really want to get right now, and in exchange for that you will get an equal marriage later where you will also have to put in more work. And between, obviously it didn't add up. They're like, okay, you give up what you want now, you give up what you want later, what the hell is this stupid program offering me? And so I think really sort of going and thinking through and saying the language, but not even the language, the intent of in a much more holistic manner, actually talking about what and going from the questions and not ignoring the questions that men are asking. So what we changed in our approach was also that a lot of men, we were really thrilled, are asking us, how do I know if my partner is having fun? And that approach became an approach of saying, your partner will have fun if they're feeling safe, if they are feeling comfortable. How will they feel safe and comfortable if you had a conversation about what they really want to do? Also, then bringing the conversation to saying if your partner doesn't want to do one thing, maybe they want to do another. So you understand no, but that's how you try and understand what your partner really wants, because the no is not a no to your entire masculinity, not a no to the idea of sex. It's a no to doing this right now. So those have been the ways in which we've actually tried to negotiate and really think about what are the questions that men bring to that room in which we are doing the program, and working off of that instead of having a pre-decided thing of we have to arrive at no means no idea of consent. So giving up some of that and taking a long-winded route sometimes have been very helpful to us.
I'd like to add here that whilst we ensure that in the trainings there are facilitators that are both, but we're running the groups, we normally get male facilitators because we feel that there is a lack of role models that boys have to follow. So these men who are actually running these groups become the role models that young men aspire towards. So I think it's also important to have that within the program so that they can see that yes, that there are people in my community, men who are behaving in this way, and that they are respected in my community because of what they do. So I think that is also a very important part to have that. And when you're doing trainings and stuff, you bring in the women, but the day-to-day running of the groups, we prefer to have men do it. That's one. And the second thing about what is it that what is it that we can offer men? And I think that sometimes if we look at the fact of patriarchy giving men a lot of privileges, we talk about that, but then at the same time, we also talk about what are the issues that impact men. So if, and there are many ways in which men are impacted negatively. So the obvious one is, of course, if there is a woman in their family who's facing violence, then it's the men who have to provide her the support. So in a way, they are being impacted because of that. But at the same time, like direct impact, where they are being made to, they are the breadwinners. Now, if a man does not perform that role properly, what happens to him? And how difficult it is for them to actually be able to provide that role, and how much easier it would be if that load was shared, and that you could actually talk about these issues. What about emotions? What about expressing love, affection? All of these things also become a topic of discussion. And I think that is something that is intangible. It takes time, but it is something that does provide a hook, which men hang on to in a sense, and that is a motivator for men too. So I think that a lot of the learning that we've had is that these things are not things that men think about. Once you start them thinking about it, then it kind of leads one thing into another. And like I said right at the very beginning, a lot of them will drop out because, as you all are saying, and as we know, there's a lot for them to lose. But those who stay back, then they become the core, and they are able to make those shifts and changes, I think.
Actually, I would also like to add on this
Yeah,
gender of
please.
facilitators. Uh, uh, Actually, initially, when you go always, as Anu was saying, men for men, women for women kind of facilitators you have, because we have that notion in our mind that people will be free with the same gender. But actually, over the period, the experience has also taught us that what is important in these kind of interventions, behavioral change interventions, which address our deep rooted attitudes, the core is trust and relationship in the whole thing. Like, how do you build trust and relationship, whether you're working with your team members or whether you're working with the interventions in the community? If you build that trust and relationship, actually genders, I mean, the matter of gender starts getting withered away. I mean, if people have respect and trust, even in male facilitator or women facilitator, actually, if the facilitation is non-hierarchical, non-judgmental, and non-threatening, then I think people believe in facilitators, and they do open up and they do come up with their own experiences and try and seek help. So that has been our experience. Initially, we also tried with men for men, women for women, but actually, because the relationship becomes so important when you are addressing your own deep rooted attitudes and constructions, mental constructions. and mental models. You need that kind of trust, saying somebody, oh, this is not wrong, go ahead and I'm with you if anything happens. Not I am with you, we are with you kind of thing. So the more collective, larger collective we have, that becomes a safer space for people to speak up. That has been the experience.
Thank you so much, Manak, Anuradha, and Sujata, ma'am. Just final thing from my end. Do we have any resources, where which we could refer to, especially where interventions and especially the things that you could, talk to young boys and men, and if that kind of resource is available, if you could share that, that'd be fantastic.
I think all our websites have a lot of tools and resources that you could look at, training programs and different intervention strategies that you could look at. So I think, and there was a whole compilation done by Men Engage internationally,
Yeah.
which also brought out a whole load of tools that can be used for conversation with men. So I think that's available online. And maybe if Christina or Swarna could gather that and send it to everybody, or maybe to,
That would be fantastic.
uh, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So anyone, Christina, I think you have your hand.
Okay, yeah. So again, thank you everyone for your insight, for joining this panel. My question is for everyone. If you, again, so hindsight is 2020, right? So, right, and if you also had a grant, an unrestricted grant, maybe, let's say 1 CR over 3 years, what would you spend the money on, and how would you design your programs?
You want each of the panelists to say what should be the program for 1 CR? Why you're going to fund it?
No, we'll make the amount more believable. Maybe you had 25 lakhs.
25 lakhs.
So each of the panelists, you want to go into?
No, so I'm not looking for budget items. I just want to understand that if you had a chance to do it again, right? If you had a chance to start a program, what would it look like, and how would you go about doing it?
But this sounds a bit weird, but I mean, to me, I don't think I would do it any differently, because the program that we're doing is the way we want to do it.
Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah.
is telling us how to do a program. I mean, the way I look at it is that I present a program to a funder. If they are happy to fund me, fine. Otherwise, I'm not doing it. So the program that we're doing is based on our experience in the past and what we want to do in the future. So our proposals are written up about what we want to do, and we're doing it the way we feel at this point is best. Now, and you keep in your programs enough space so that you can always respond to what is happening on the ground. And to be fair, I mean, till today, touch wood, we've had funders whom we can say, look, this is what we are seeing and we want to do this, may we do this? And they will respond saying yes. So I think we need to have, if we're clear about what we want to do and we're presenting that to the funder and the funder's funding you, then there's really no need to feel restricted. At least I don't think we've ever felt restricted in doing what we have to do when things are coming up from the ground, because it's coming from the program itself is teaching you every day what you need to do and how you need to tweak it. So I don't think we do anything differently.
Yeah. I think same. Because even interventions, if you see, and that must be the case with all organizations that are working with men, or this is a hint for those who want to work on men. Actually, you can't work with just a single very linear intervention. So you already see so many things on the canvas and tune your intervention to that. So for example, we are working on leadership building of young men. We are also working with family as a unit. We are working with culture aspects. So all that is, as Anu is saying, you take a lot of factors into consideration while designing your thing, and then go with that kind of thing. So there is, but then
So we will
only
add
one-
25 lakhs to what we are doing currently, Christina. That's what will happen.
Yeah. And only one thing I would like to say here for the organizations who are really thinking newly of working with men is look at it as process and not as a project, because that will, it's not
Exactly.
3 years project, it's not 2 years project, it's not confined to whether you get 1 crore in 3 years or 25 lakhs or whatever. Actually look at it as a process, because that itself evolves with the commitment and the passion and the creativity that we show in the program, which we always show. So trust that it's a process. That's only thing I would say.
The
Yeah,
only challenge in that is, Sujata, that always the donors are not looking at it as a process. So
Yeah,
how do you negotiate that? How do
yeah,
we? So the conversation that we really need to also have is a lot of shift, like what Manak was saying, is now on let's work with men and boys, and if we change
yeah,
them, then everything will change. And it is
yeah,
affecting the kind of resources that are available to working on even services for women in violence. There is a
yeah,
shift that one
yeah,
can see, and that is a danger that one has to recognize and fight against, because today if you don't have that services and just work with men is not going to
yeah,
be enough.
yeah.
So how do we
Sure.
build both of that together is a question that
Yeah,
and somewhere I like this is all of us are working with both boys and girls, but I think this is something, at least for us, we very clearly felt that we couldn't work only with boys, that jointly working with both boys and girls and creating a space of leadership for girls within a joint space
yeah,
is critical also, because that's when women also get empowered in that process much more than if you're working alone with them. But then boys also get answered by the girls, so it becomes a possibility of working together. Anybody else? We are running short of time. Last question I can take.
We actually have a question on the chat box from Anita. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll take that one. I'll just read it out. Panelists, can you please elaborate on the advantages to boys and men besides those regarding health, like addiction, risky behavior, etc.?
I think quite a lot of that
yeah,
has been touched on, because we are talking about recognizing privilege of multiple levels. But one of the things that has also helped us is looking at men looking at restrictions in their lives because of their being have to be breadwinner. So many choices are not allowed for them to make in their life. So one is the emotional quotient, and recognition that they can have an emotional quotient. And does society allow, like in our survey, when we ask can boys cry in public, more women have said no than men, and which was a surprising thing. So women are also not accepting a boy who can cry. So how do you create that kind of emotional space for boys to be emotional, but also have different careers, have different kinds of imagination of how they want to lead their lives? So I think that becomes a possibility. And what Anu was saying is that building their own leadership, so creating that space for them to see themselves beyond this nobody to somebody who the community listens to. So there are multiple ways in which we have to put forward what is it in for them. And also we feel that sometimes how they can improve the society in larger sense also is something that can be, it's not just changing um,
well,
lives of women in direct sense, but what can they do? Like we do a lot of safety audits with young boys and girls, and we talk about the whole idea of how do you create a better city. Why is that certain public spaces are not possible for women to access, and how can we create city which is accessible by everybody? So in those kind of spaces also they see their role. Anybody else wants to add?
I think, yeah, just two quick responses to the previous questions. I think, like you said, the intersectional programming approach of being able to acknowledge the kinds of pressures that men face because of gender norms and patriarchy, as well as holding men accountable to the kinds of violence that they accept, perpetrate, continue to sort of further. I think that's the approach that we're all saying. Like we would stick with it. We would stick with that, and we would continue doing that kind of work. I think some of the, if I have to look at programmatic areas during the research that we were doing, something that became, that came up quite a lot was this whole internet WhatsApp area, where a lot of men reported actually being hauled into their caste-based groups repeatedly by friends or acquaintances over WhatsApp, where even if they leave a group, they are put back in that group, and a lot of caste coming together and kind of messaging happens in these WhatsApp groups. So I think one thing that I would definitely say in terms of forward work is you cannot ignore caste when you're working with masculinities and with men, because that's a huge part of it. And trying to figure out how this kind of messaging to men is happening through this targeted kind of digital platforms. I think that's something that we should definitely find out more about and get into in terms of programming. That's why I keep saying like family WhatsApp group should be the new target intervention of any program on gender that we want to do. And I think, so I think, and taking on from that, I would say that apart from health and all of this, one of the things that can definitely benefit men from coming into these kinds of programs. One is, I think, and Paramita, who runs Agents of Ishq, talks about this a lot, like this whole idea of being an intersectional person, this whole acknowledgement of a large emotional aspect of yourself, building resilience, actually allowing men to have the kind of conversation that we don't usually allow under the current gender norms and patriarchy. I think that's the big benefit that we've also seen men take, and then that has opened up a lot of channels of conversation. So I think any leadership program or any program that takes up maybe gender and self exploration, self reflection, and confidence building would allow people to really sort of realize their whole identity and be able to function from it, free from all kinds of gender as well as other norms. And I think that is comprehensively the faida of the programs that we should be talking about as well.
Great. So I think on this note, I'm going to close this webinar. I think this idea that, the question of privilege is something that we are also questioning within the women's movement, and we are looking at the caste, class, intersection, sexuality intersection within the women, and we are looking at how do we challenge in a similar kind of notion of intersection that we are also talking about challenging with men. And I think that is the whole idea of how do we challenge the notion of power within each one of us. And, the thing is about becoming better human beings. And that's the challenge. How do we look at connection to that as a better human being? And if we can build upon that for a better world, I think that's what we are talking about. So I think on this note, I want to thank the organizers and thank all the panelists for being here. And I think this kind of conversation is something that we need to come together much more and see how we can take up some of the challenges and see how we can take them forward. So thank you very much. And all of you, please, you're welcome to visit all our website and take whatever material that's relevant. So thank you very much.
And I would like to add my thanks on behalf of Project Raise and Prajnya to all of you, Sujata, Anuradha, Manak, and Nandita, who took the time to be part of this panel and to share the wealth of your experiences with those of us who are just starting out. I also have the task of closing with a commercial for next week's panel. Feb 12th, same time, same place. We have a panel on enabling working with men and boys. It's inclusive social change. And we have a panel of funders from the Asia Foundation. Sorry, I'm blank. Christina, come on.
Yes.
Antika, someone.
So we have a panel of funders from the Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiatives, from the Empower Foundation and the Asia Foundation. And a colleague from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung will be moderating the panel.
So, this we'll pick up from Christina's question earlier today about what would you do if, and what could you do if, and how do you imagine this change in the context of the support available, not available, and so on. So I hope that many of you, most of you, all of you, and many more of you would join us next week. Do register. Thank you so much again for being here, and all the participants in this discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Can we do a photograph? If you would
Oh,
turn
yeah.
on your screens quickly.
You.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please send
Thank you.
us. Huh? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.